Today in our 2018 Lincoln MKX, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Easy 4 Baseplate Kit with removable arms, part number RM-524447-4. Keep in mind this is only one component of our flat toe setup. You're going to need a baseplate and a braking system along with the tow bar wiring. So here's what our baseplate looks like once we have it installed. Now I do want to mention that these other accessories on the front here are not included in the kit, but our baseplate is going to serve as the attachment point on our Lincoln so we can hook our tow bar up. As you can see, with the arms removed, it's going to have a nice sleek look on the front, so we're not going to have to worry about those big arms sticking out whenever we're not towing. Now on our arms, we already went ahead and installed the bracket that's going to hook up for our crossbar, but the way we're going to install the arms is we're just going to slide them in. There's going to be that silver pin. We're going to push in until it presses that pin in and then slowly rotate it until it locks into place. Now the brackets here that we mounted to the removable arms as well as the crossbar, they are going to be sold separately, but this is going to be the connection point where we mount our tow bar to right here. As far as installation goes, there is going to be a little bit of minor drilling that we're going to have to do to get it in place, just enlarging one hole in the frame. But it is a custom designed base plate, so this installation is going to be relatively straightforward. Now we are going to have to do some minor trimming in the fascia so that we can get our arms to go through, as well as any other accessories that we may have. Now like most base plates, we are going to have our safety chain connection points on either side. They're pretty well hidden, but at the same time, they're easy enough to access so we can get our chains hooked up. Roadmaster has also given us a spot to mount any kind of electrical connector. There's two rods back here that we have our connector screwed into, and we have a pre-installed bracket for our breakaway switch. Now our base plate is going to take a lot of that unwanted stress and strain off of our front suspension, because it's going to be bolted directly to the frame and it's going to evenly distribute that towing force across the front. So we can make sure that we're getting where we're going safely. So now that we've seen the finished result of our base plate, let's show you how to get it installed. To begin our installation, we're going to want to open up the hood and we're going to have to remove this radiator cover up front. Now there's going to be a lot of these little push pin fasteners, going to be about 19 of them. So you're going to grab a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool. There's going to be a notch in each one of those. You're going to pop out the center section, which will take tension off the clip, and then we can pull the rest of it out. So you just want to make sure you get all of them out going across the front and the back side of the panel so we can pull the panel all the way off. With all the clips removed, we're going to take our radiator cover and set it aside. Now on each side, if we look at our grill here, we can see that we're going to have a bolt that's holding it in place. We don't need to remove the ones in between there. We just want to remove the bolts that are attached to the fascia here. So we can grab a 10mm socket and pull those 3 bolts out on each side. Then on the chrome trim right above the headlight, we're going to have 2 bolts that are holding it in place. Now you're going to want to grab a T25 Torx bit and we can pull those out. And we're going to have those same bolts on the other side as well. Now if we come to right in the front wheel well area towards the front of our bumper, we're going to have a total of 6 push pin fasteners. Now one of them is going to be kind of high towards the center on the top of the wheel well liner. We're going to want to pull all those fasteners out. So again, grab yourself a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool. And these are going to work in the same way. We're going to pop that center section out because you don't want to break the clip, so you got to get that center section out first, and we'll come underneath the rest of it and pull it out. So with all those clips removed, we're going to come to the bottom of where that trim ring is, right between our fascia and the fender well, and we're going to gently pull this out, releasing the clips up until we can at least get to where the fender meets the fascia. And then you're going to want to pull out a little bit more so we can get access back here. Now there's a clip back here that's going to be holding it in place, so you may need to take a trim panel tool and kind of help pull that clip out, because we need to get access to inside the wheel well area here. So we should have enough room if we release those 3 clips and then go up 2 more onto the fender itself. And we pull back the wheel well liner a little bit. You'll notice we're going to have some bolts here that we're going to have to pull out. Now inside the wheel well, we'll see that first one pretty predominantly, but there is going to be a total of these 3 bolts in there. So you're going to want to grab an 8mm socket and pull them out. Now the room is very limited, so it may be challenging just to get the socket on there. So with all 3 of those bolts removed, we're going to repeat that whole process on the other side. If we move to the bottom of our MKX, we're going to have this lower splash shield. We're going to have to pull all the fasteners along the front as well as a few towards the back to remove it. So you're going to want to grab a 5.5mm socket and pull out all the screws that are attaching the splash shield to the bottom. On our MKX, a few of the bolts aren't the same size, so we're going to be using a 7mm socket to pull those out. Now towards the back of the splash shield, we are going to have another push pin, 1 on each side. So we'll go ahead and pop that center section out, and then we'll pull the other one out. And with all those removed, we can lower our splash shield and set it aside. So now with an extra set of hands, we're going to get ready to remove our fascia, but make sure that above the headlight, you pull that chrome trim up so that it releases out of those little locking tabs. Then we're going to grab the corner of our fascia, and you're going to want to pull down and away, because there is an alignment pin in there, and kind of pull on the chrome trim at the same time. Now at the corner here of that chrome trim ring, there is going to be a clip holding it in place. So you're going to want to grab above the headlight and then at the bottom of the fascia and pull straight out, and it'll release that little tab here. Now on the driver's side, we are going to have some electrical connectors that we're going to have to disconnect. So if we find the top of it, there's going to be a small button. Push on the button and we can disconnect it. You just want to make sure that there's no other connectors that are going to be plugged into it or plugged into the vehicle. So if we come towards the frame a little bit, we're going to have 2 more that are tied into it. So we're going to want to pull those out as well. Push in on the tab and disconnect it. It may help to pull those clips out so you can get access to it. Now on the passenger side, we have a washer hose over here that's going to run to the front of our fascia. I'm going to take a pair of locking pliers. I'm just going to pinch that hose off, and we don't have to worry about any leaks. And then that black plastic ring that's going around the hose, we just kind of push on it. It'll disconnect the hose, and we can set the fascia aside. So with our fascia removed, we come to the very center. This is going to be our ambient temperature sensor. Now we're going to have to relocate this. So you want to take a trim panel tool and come to the bottom, and we're going to pull the push pin out that's holding the wire in place. And then we're going to take our ambient temperature sensor and remove that as well from the center section. Going to be like 2 push pin style connectors in there. We can just set this aside for now. You're going to want to grab a rather small, about a 1/8 inch drill bit, and from that lower hole we're going to move over about a 1/2 inch or so, and we're going to drill a hole into the plastic. Now those 2 holes are going to serve as our new mounting location for our ambient temperature sensor, and we're just going to turn it to the side like this. Now you may have to enlarge that hole depending on how big of one you drilled. You just want to get the spacing right so that we can plug it in. So this is going to be the new location that we're going to mount it. Just want to make sure again that it's nice and secure in that plastic. Now on the driver's side, we're going to have this wire loom and it's going to have a tab that is attached to right here on the opening. So again, trim panel tool, flathead screwdriver, we're going to pop that wire loom out. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the one up here as well, that way I have a little bit more room to move the wire around. And you're just going to want to push that out of the way because we're going to have to do some trimming over here. And basically the way we're going to trim this is we want to trim, for the most part, this entire side area that's protruding outward, so it'll be nice and flush with the back area. I'm going to be using a rotary tool to cut it out. And again, basically we just want to come across the top and cut the side protruding out, take that section out. But be careful of your wire loom not to cut it or cause any damage. Now on the passenger side, I went ahead and marked out the area that we need to trim. We don't need to trim quite as much over here. So basically if we come to that little opening right here in the center and we go straight back and down to about the bottom of that section that sticks out, that's the area we're going to need to trim. Again, I'm going to be using a rotary tool. You just want to be careful when you're cutting not to go too deep or cut into the louvers themselves back here. Now back towards the center section where our louvers are, we're going to have to remove the bottom two louvers on each side. Now the easiest way to get these out is you just kind of bend them in. One side towards the outside will pop out. And then we can just pull on the center section and we can pull the louver out. And again, we're going to want to do that for the bottom two on each side. Now on each side, on the bottom of our MKX, we're going to have two bolts that are holding in the lower radiator support. We're going to want to grab a 10mm socket and remove those two bolts. And when you go to remove that second one, you kind of want to just slowly take it out or have a hand help support it, because the radiator is going to slightly drop down. But we're going to let it hang here, and we can go ahead and remove the other side very slowly and carefully. Now on the bottom of the subframe, we're going to have a hole that will go all the way through, but we're going to need to enlarge it to a 1/2 inch. So we can kind of push that radiator support out of the way just a tad, and we're going to take a 1/2 inch drill bit, and we're going to be drilling from the bottom going up. And you want to make sure you go all the way through the subframe brace, including going through the top. Once we have the hole drilled over here, we're going to repeat that on the other side. Now it's not a good idea to leave exposed metal on your vehicle, so I'm going to come back with a little bit of spray paint. I'm going to paint over the area that I drilled through to help prevent any kind of rust or corrosion from building up. Now on each side of our bumper core here, we are going to have to remove this plastic padding that's going over the top of it. So you're going to want to push your wire loom out of the way, make sure it doesn't get damaged. I'm going to be using a rotary tool, just cutting along this edge here, so it'll be nice and straight along with the bottom section. We're going to want to trim that same section out on the other side. Now right where our subframe here meets the bumper core, we're going to want to grab one of our shim plates. And they are side specific, but you want to make sure that that tab is facing down. You'll notice that it's got kind of a smaller section. You want that facing towards the back, and this will kind of contour to the bumper here. Now once we have the correct plate in position, we're going to take one of our U-bolts, place one end through the hole in the plate, and then it's going to straddle the bumper beam itself. And we'll go ahead and do that for the other side too. Now with an extra set of hands, we're going to lift our base plate into position. You want to come underneath the subframe, so this lower portion comes down. And we may have to move the U-bolt a little bit just to make sure it lines up with these two holes. You want that U-bolt to drop down through the front and back of your base plate. And we're going to be securing the base plate with a couple locking nuts. Now the way we're going to know that they're locking nuts is they're going to have a couple dimples on the sides, and the regular nuts aren't going to have those. So for now, we're just going to get these on there hand tight, just real loose, just so the base plate will support itself. Now where our main receiver brace came under the subframe, right where we drilled that hole, the instructions say to take a 1/2 inch by 4 inch bolt and a large plate washer and come through the top going down to the bottom. Now, as you can see, we have our intercooler and a sensor right here, so we're not going to be able to do that, but the instructions do say if there's anything in the way to come from the bottom. So we're going to take our long bolt and the large plate washer and come from the bottom side and come up through the top. And we'll be securing it with a lock washer and a 1/2 inch nut. So we're going to slide our lock washer on first, and we can loosely thread the nut in place. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Before we tighten our bolts down, I'm going to take some Loctite and put it on a little bit of the threads of each one of my bolts. Just make sure you get it down in there. You may have to loosen the nut up a little bit. Just put a little bit on the threads, and we'll do the same thing for the U-bolts and any other bolts that are holding our base plate in place. I'm going to come back with a 3/4 inch socket and snug up all my 1/2 inch hardware. With the U-bolts, you kind of want to go back and forth alternating so it doesn't put it in a bind. And then for our hardware down here, I'm still going to be using that 3/4 inch socket, but I'm also going to be using a 3/4 inch wrench so that I can hold the nut on top. And we'll repeat that for any of our remaining hardware. So now I'm going to come back with a torque wrench, and I'm going to torque all my hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. And again, with the U-bolts, you kind of want to do a couple turns on one, move over to the other side of the U-bolt, do a couple turns there, and go back and forth alternating until we have them fully torqued down. And we'll repeat that for the remaining hardware. So you're going to want to lift up on that radiator support and line up those two holes, and start out by getting those bolts in there hand tight so we don't cross thread them. And once we have them in there hand tight, we can come back with that 10mm socket and snug them up. And we'll put the other side in as well. Before we put our fascia back on, we are going to have to trim out a section so that our arms can fit through, because they're going to be coming right about here where the chrome trim meets the black plastic. Now on the back of the instructions, they do provide you with a template, so you're going to want to cut that out and then basically line it up to where that curve fits on the fascia. And they only provide you with one, so I'm going to be using a 2-inch hole saw just to make sure I can get my pilot hole centered and through the paper. So we have a small hole through the paper. Now we're just going to make a small mark on the fascia itself so we can move the paper and not destroy it before we go over to the other side. So that's where we're going to want to drill our pilot hole. So now that we have our pilot hole drilled, again I'm going to come back with a 2-inch hole saw, and I'm going to drill a nice clean cut through my fascia. So now that we have this hole drilled, we can go ahead and clean up any of the shavings around the edge here and take our template, but we're going to flip it over for the other side. Now with an extra set of hands, we're going to get our fascia put in place. Don't forget to plug in the electrical connectors on the driver's side, and then we'll also plug in our washer tank over on the passenger side. We're going to loosely get our fascia in the general area, but then we may have to help guide it up to go over and around the base plate. And you'll notice down here I did trim out that lower part of the grill. Just made it a lot easier for all my other accessories like my breakaway switch, the electrical connector, as well as our other part of our braking system to come through, and our safety cable connection points that we won't have to fight them when we're putting our fascia back on. Now when you're putting your fascia back on, you want to make sure that those tabs get lined up with the fender here. You just kind of push them in, and when we put the bolts back in place, it'll draw it all back to where it needs to be. Then we can start replacing all the fasteners that we took out from earlier. And that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Easy 4 baseplate kit with removable arms, part number RM-524447-4 on our 2018 Lincoln MKX.